one of the most documented events in human history, is still being called fake. Not by a few people, by millions. And the disturbing part is not the doubt itself. It is why that doubt refuses to die. In 1969, during the Apollo 11 moon landing, human beings walked on the surface of the moon for the first time. It was not a hidden experiment. It was not a secret mission. It was broadcast live. Over 600 million people watched it unfold in real time. Radios tracked it. Telescopes followed it. Even rival nations monitored every move. Thousands of engineers worked on it. Hundreds of scientists checked every calculation. 3 astronauts risked their lives to make it happen. Every step was recorded, documented, analyzed, and archived. There are physical samples brought back from the moon that scientists around the world have studied for decades. These rocks are not like anything naturally found on Earth. They carry a history that points directly to the moon. And yet, despite all of this, the debate never ended. There are still people who believe it was staged, that it was filmed on Earth, that it was part of a massive deception during the Cold War, that somehow thousands of people stayed silent for more than half a century. No verified leak, no credible confession, no evidence that survives scientific scrutiny. Still, the belief remains. That is where things start to become strange, because this is not just about a disagreement over facts. This is not a simple case of confusion or lack of information. The facts are not hidden. They are everywhere. The evidence is overwhelming, layered, and independently verified across decades. If this were only about missing information, the debate would have ended long ago. But it did not. Instead, it evolved. It spread across generations. People who were not even alive in 1969 now question it with confidence. Entire communities formed around the idea that the moon landing never happened. Books were written. Documentaries were produced. Online discussions continue every day, repeating the same claims again and again. And here is something most people do not realize. Some of the strongest evidence for the moon landing has been publicly available for decades, yet it rarely changes minds. For example, there are mirrors placed on the moon during the Apollo missions. These are not symbolic objects. They are still used in scientific experiments today. Scientists fire lasers from Earth and measure the exact time it takes for the light to bounce back. This is how we measure the distance between Earth and the moon with extreme precision. This experiment only works because those mirrors are physically there, and they were placed there by humans. Still, for many, this is not enough. That raises a deeper question, a much more uncomfortable one. If clear, testable, repeatable evidence is not enough to settle a debate, then what is? Because at this point, the moon landing is no longer just a historical event being questioned. It has become a window into something far more complex, something that goes beyond science, beyond technology, and beyond history itself. It points directly at the human mind. The real reason this debate refuses to disappear is not hidden in space. It is hidden in how people think, how beliefs form, and how they survive even when they are challenged by reality. There is a powerful force inside the human brain that protects existing beliefs. Even when those beliefs are weak, even when they are built on flawed assumptions. Once a belief becomes part of a person's identity, it becomes difficult to remove. Evidence alone is often not enough. In some cases, evidence can even make the belief stronger. That is where this story becomes disturbing, because it means the problem is not limited to the moon landing. The same pattern can appear in other areas: science, history, politics, even everyday life. The human brain does not always choose truth. Sometimes it chooses comfort. Sometimes it chooses certainty over accuracy. And when enough people do this at the same time, a belief can survive almost anything, even reality. In this video, you will learn why the moon landing debate refuses to go away, even after decades of proof. You will understand the hidden psychological forces that shape belief. You will see how misinformation spreads and why it feels convincing. And most importantly, you will discover why some ideas are almost impossible to erase, no matter how strong the evidence against them becomes. By the end, the question will not just be about the moon. It will be about how the human mind decides what is real. Welcome to the channel. Subscribe for more deep science and space stories that challenge how you see reality. The evidence for the moon landing is not small, it is not fragile, it is not based on a single source. It is massive, layered, and global. Start with the rocks. During the Apollo 11 moon landing and the missions that followed, astronauts brought back about 382 kilograms of lunar material. These rocks were not locked away in one country. They were shared with scientists across the world. Laboratories in different nations studied them independently. The results matched. These rocks carry signatures that are almost impossible to fake. They formed in a vacuum. They show no signs of water exposure. Some contain tiny glass beads created by micrometeorite impacts, something that happens constantly on the moon but not on Earth. Their chemical composition is different from anything found naturally on this planet. Even their age tells a story that fits the history of the moon. To fake this, thousands of samples would need to be created with perfect consistency, then distributed globally, then studied for decades without a single contradiction. That alone stretches beyond belief. Then there is something even more uncomfortable for conspiracy claims. The missions were not only watched by one country. At the height of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were rivals. They were competing for global dominance. If there was ever a moment to expose a lie, this was it. The Soviet Union tracked the Apollo missions with its own equipment. They followed the signals. They confirmed the trajectories. They never challenged the landing as a hoax. That silence was not friendly. It was verification. Other countries did the same. Observatories around the world monitored the spacecraft as it traveled to the moon. The signals were real. The path was real. The mission was real. And then there are the mirrors. Small devices called retroreflectors were placed on the moon by astronauts. They are still there. They are still working. Scientists on Earth send laser pulses toward the moon. These pulses hit the reflectors and bounce straight back. The time it takes for the light to return reveals the exact distance between Earth and the moon. This is not theory. This is a live experiment that continues today. Anyone with the right equipment can attempt it. The data is consistent. The reflectors are exactly where the mission said they would be. There is also the scale of human involvement. More than 400,000 people worked on the Apollo program. Engineers, technicians, mathematicians, astronauts, private companies were involved, government agencies were involved. Each person handled a small piece of a much larger system. Every piece had to function perfectly. For a hoax to work, all of them would need to stay silent, not for a few years, for decades. No verified whistleblower has ever produced evidence that survives scrutiny. No documents have surfaced that reveal a hidden operation of that scale. No insider has stepped forward with proof that holds under investigation. And yet, despite all of this, the rejection continues. The evidence is not weak. It is overwhelming. It comes from rocks, machines, global observation, and human testimony on a massive scale. It has been tested again and again, across time and across countries. Still, for some, none of it is enough. The strange part is not the lack of evidence. The strange part is how the mind responds to it. There is a hidden pattern in how people process information. It does not always follow logic. It does not always follow truth. It follows something deeper. One of the strongest forces is called confirmation bias. This is the tendency to search for information that supports what a person already believes. At the same time, it quietly filters out anything that challenges that belief. It works in the background. Most people do not even notice it happening. A person who believes the moon landing was staged will focus on small details that seem unusual, shadows that look strange, movements that feel unnatural, photographs that appear inconsistent. These details are repeated, shared, and reinforced. At the same time, the overwhelming body of evidence is ignored, not because it is weak, but because it does not fit the belief that already exists. This creates a closed loop. The belief selects the evidence strengthens the belief, and the cycle continues. Then comes something even more powerful: cognitive dissonance. This happens when a person is faced with information that directly contradicts what they believe. It creates tension, a kind of mental discomfort that the brain wants to resolve as quickly as possible. There are two ways to resolve it. One way is to change the belief. The other way is to reject the new information. In many cases, the brain chooses the second option. It is faster. It is easier. It protects a sense of certainty. This leads to a surprising reaction. Strong evidence does not always weaken a false belief. Sometimes it strengthens it. When a person is deeply invested in an idea, any challenge to that idea can feel like a personal attack. The brain shifts into defense mode. It builds arguments. It searches for flaws in the opposing evidence. It becomes more confident, not less. Over time, the belief becomes more than just an opinion. It becomes part of identity. This is where things become difficult to reverse. When a belief is tied to identity, changing it feels like losing a part of oneself. It feels like admitting error in front of others. It feels like giving up control. The brain resists this strongly. This is why debates about the moon landing often go nowhere. The conversation is not just about facts. It is about identity, trust, and belonging. People form communities around shared beliefs. These groups reinforce each other. They repeat the same ideas. They create a sense of certainty that feels stable and safe. Inside that environment, opposing evidence feels distant and untrustworthy. Even clear, testable facts struggle to break through. The human brain is powerful. It can solve complex problems. It can build machines that reach the moon. But it also has limits. It is not designed purely to find truth. It is designed to protect beliefs, reduce uncertainty, and maintain a sense of stability. And once a belief is protected by these systems, it becomes extremely resistant to change. That is why the evidence alone is not enough. There is another layer to this. It is not only about how the brain filters information. It is also about what the brain prefers to believe. Simple explanations feel good. They are easy to understand. They require less effort. A complex reality, on the other hand, demands patience. It demands trust in systems, data, and expertise that most people never directly experience. The moon landing is not a simple story. It involves advanced physics, precise engineering, orbital mechanics, and thousands of coordinated actions. It depends on machines that must work perfectly in an environment that can kill instantly. It depends on calculations so precise that even a small error can lead to failure. For many, that level of complexity feels distant. It feels abstract. It feels difficult to grasp. A conspiracy offers something different. It replaces complexity with a single idea. It turns a massive scientific achievement into a controlled narrative. Instead of thousands of moving parts, there is one explanation. It was staged. That simplicity is powerful. There is also something else at work. Some events feel too big to be real. The idea that human beings left Earth, traveled across space, landed on another world, and returned safely can feel overwhelming. It challenges everyday experience. It stretches what feels possible. For some minds, this creates discomfort. The brain looks for a way to make the event feel more familiar, more grounded, more understandable. This is where another bias appears, proportionality bias. This is the tendency to believe that big events must have equally big causes, but not in a scientific sense, in a dramatic sense, in a hidden sense. A historic achievement like the Apollo 11 moon landing becomes a stage for something larger behind the scenes, a secret plan, a hidden operation, a controlled deception. The mind feels satisfied when the scale of the explanation matches the scale of the event. even if that explanation lacks evidence. There is also the question of trust. Large institutions require belief in systems that most people cannot directly verify. Governments, space agencies, scientific organizations, these structures operate at a scale far beyond individual experience. When trust in these institutions weakens, alternative narratives become more appealing. A conspiracy provides a sense of independence. It allows a person to feel that they see something others do not. It creates a feeling of insight, of awareness, of being outside the system. This feeling can be strong. It turns uncertainty into certainty. Instead of relying on complex data and expert analysis, the explanation becomes personal, direct, controlled. In a world filled with unknowns, this creates comfort. Even if the explanation is false, it reduces confusion. It replaces doubt with clarity. It gives the mind a stable answer. That is why conspiracy theories can feel convincing even when they collapse under scrutiny. They are not built to withstand scientific testing. They are built to satisfy emotional and psychological needs. They reduce uncertainty. They simplify complexity. They create a sense of control in situations where control feels limited. And once that sense of control is established, letting it go becomes difficult. The debate did not grow in silence. It was amplified. In the years after the Apollo 11 moon landing, a small wave of skepticism began to appear. It did not start as a global movement. It started with a few voices. Books were written, claims were made, questions were framed in ways that sounded persuasive but avoided full context. Then media stepped in. Television specials and documentaries began to explore these ideas. Some were presented as investigations. Others leaned into mystery and doubt. They often highlighted strange details without explaining the science behind them. Shadows on the moon, the way the flag moved, the absence of stars in photographs. These details felt convincing at first glance. They created tension. They raised questions. But many of them had simple explanations based on physics and camera exposure. Those explanations were often missing or minimized. This created a pattern. Doubt was presented clearly. Evidence was presented briefly or not at all. Pop culture made it stronger. Films and entertainment projects began to include themes of hidden truths and secret operations. The idea that large events could be staged became familiar. It became part of storytelling. Over time, the line between fiction and reality blurred for some audiences. Then the internet changed everything. Information was no longer controlled by a few sources. Anyone could publish an idea. Anyone could share a claim. This created a massive flow of content, both accurate and false. But not all information spreads equally. Online, platforms are built to keep attention. Their systems track what people click, watch, and share. Content that creates strong reactions is pushed further. Content that is calm and detailed often moves slower. Controversy travels fast. A bold claim that challenges a historic event spreads quickly. It creates curiosity. It creates debate. It creates emotion. This signals the system to show it to more people. Accurate explanations often require time. They involve science, context, and careful reasoning. They do not create the same instant reaction. As a result, they spread more slowly. This creates an imbalance. False claims can reach millions before detailed explanations even begin to catch up. There is also the effect of echo chambers. Online spaces often group people with similar views. Over time, these spaces reinforce the same ideas. The same arguments are repeated. The same sources are shared. Opposing views become rare or are dismissed quickly. Inside these environments, a belief can feel widely accepted even if it is not supported by broader evidence.
Another detail makes this more powerful.
False claims are often simple. They reduce complex events into short statements. They use clear language. They focus on a single point that feels easy to understand. Scientific explanations are different. They require background knowledge they involve multiple factors. They often explain why something looks unusual, but is actually expected under certain conditions. This difference matters. The human brain prefers clarity and speed. It absorbs simple claims faster than complex explanations. Over time, repeated exposure strengthens belief. A claim that is seen again and again begins to feel familiar. Familiarity can be mistaken for truth. Even without strong evidence, repetition builds confidence. This is how the modern information environment keeps the debate alive. It does not rely on new evidence. It relies on speed, repetition, and attention. Even after decades of evidence, the debate does not fade. It changes shape. It passes from one generation to the next like a story that never fully closes. Each new generation discovers the same claims again, but they do not always enter the discussion with the same context. The original Cold War tension is distant history. The urgency of 1969 feels remote. The scale of the engineering effort is not something they lived through. So the question is seen fresh again, without the background that made the evidence feel overwhelming at the time. This creates a gap, and in that gap, doubt grows. A video online, a short clip, or a dramatic claim can feel more immediate than a scientific archive or decades of research. The past becomes something to question rather than something to understand. Then comes something unexpected. Debunking does not always reduce belief. In many cases, it strengthens it. When a belief is challenged directly, especially in a public or emotional way, it can trigger resistance. The mind does not always process correction as correction. Sometimes it processes it as pressure. When people feel pressured, they defend their position more strongly. This is known in psychology, and it appears across many topics, not just space, not just history. Anywhere belief and identity overlap, there is also something deeper happening. Beliefs are not held in isolation. They are shared. Online communities form around ideas. People gather in spaces where they feel understood. Over time, these groups create their own internal trust systems. Members reinforce each other. They repeat familiar arguments. They validate shared doubts. Within these spaces, the belief becomes more than an idea. It becomes part of belonging. Leaving the belief can feel like leaving the group. That social layer makes change harder. Even when strong evidence is presented, it is filtered through group trust first. If the source is not trusted by the community, the information is dismissed before it is even examined. This creates a closed environment. Inside it, the same ideas circulate again and again. They become more refined over time, more confident, more resistant to outside input. Outside that environment, the evidence remains unchanged. The lunar samples from the Apollo 11 moon landing still exist. The retroreflectors still function. The tracking data still aligns with physics. The global scientific consensus remains steady. But inside the belief system, the interpretation shifts instead of the facts. This is why the debate does not disappear. It evolves. It adapts to new platforms, new formats, new audiences. Each era adds a new layer, but the core idea stays the same. Over time, the argument is no longer just about rockets or rocks or missions. It becomes something larger. It becomes a way of questioning authority, a way of finding identity, a way of belonging to a narrative that feels separate from the mainstream. At that point, evidence alone no longer sits at the center of the discussion. Something else takes its place, and that is where the deeper truth begins to emerge. The moon landing debate was never only about the moon. That is the part most people miss. At its core, it is about how the human mind works when it faces information that feels too large, too complex, or too distant from personal experience. The story of the Apollo 11 moon landing is one of the most carefully recorded achievements in human history. It is supported by physical evidence, global observation, scientific testing, and decades of verification. Yet the debate still survives, not because the evidence is weak, But because belief does not always follow evidence in a straight line, the mind filters reality through trust, emotion, identity, and comfort. It looks for patterns that feel familiar. It protects ideas that feel stable. Even when facts are strong, they can struggle against deeply rooted beliefs that have been repeated, shared, and reinforced over time. This is the unsettling part. It shows that human understanding is not just built on data. It is also built on perception, on community, on psychological comfort, on the need to reduce uncertainty in a world that often feels too large to fully grasp. Even the clearest facts can lose their force when they collide with beliefs that are tied to identity or social belonging. In those moments, the mind does not simply ask, what is true? It also asks what feels safe to accept. That is why some ideas do not disappear, even when they are disproven. They adapt, they evolve, they move from one generation to the next. They shift form instead of fading away. And that brings the deeper question into focus. If something is well documented, widely witnessed, and scientifically verified as the moon landing can still be questioned after all this time, then the real mystery is not the event itself. It is the human mind. What else can it reshape, reject, or reinterpret when belief becomes stronger than evidence? The line between knowledge and belief is not always as fixed as it seems. And once that line becomes flexible, reality itself becomes something that different people can experience in completely different ways. That is where this story leaves us, not on the surface of the moon, but inside the mind that is still trying to understand it. If you enjoyed this deep dive into science, psychology, and space, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There is much more waiting ahead that will challenge the way reality is seen.